In the archives of the Galactic Council, there are moments recorded not in data or reports, but in silence. Silence so deep, it humbles even the oldest civilizations. And one of those silences began, the day Earth's fleet appeared. For 500,000 years, humanity was a myth. A warning from a bygone era, whispered by species who had only seen the ruins left behind. They spoke of a world that burned itself to ash, of a people too violent to survive the long night of the galaxy. The Terran Empire, in its arrogance, had declared the human species extinct. They had seen to it personally. But that was long ago. And the galaxy, in its comfortable rhythm, forgot the name Earth. Forgot that behind its blue oceans once lived a species that refused to kneel. Until that day. When Admiral Crichthane of the Terran High Command stood before the Council, he was already nervous. Reports had arrived from the frontier, ghost signals, strange energy patterns, fleets that moved without identification, ships that broadcast nothing but silence. Rumors said they came from the Outer Rim, from the dead sectors, the same regions where human ruins still drifted like ancient tombs. But Crichthane didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in power. And for the Terran Empire, power had always been simple, control through fear. Until he saw the transmission. A single image. A formation of ships, dark, angular, vast beyond measure, emerging from the void. Their hulls bore no symbols, no language, no broadcasts. Only the quiet pulse of a code, ancient yet unmistakable, Terran command. The chamber had fallen into chaos. Diplomats argued. Scholars denied. But when the image stabilized, when the fleet aligned into a pattern that matched no known doctrine but radiated the precision of human logic, silence fell again. Crichthane tried to speak. "This must be fabricated," he said, his voice cracking. "Humanity is gone. They were erased." No one answered. Because every sensor, every analysis, every verification came back clean. Authentic. Real. The fleet existed. And that realization broke something in them. The Council's representative from the Vereen Collective whispered, "What do they want?" But no one knew. The Terran ships made no demands, no declarations. They simply appeared, on the edge of the galactic core, and waited. To the younger civilizations, it was impossible. How could a dead species return, not as refugees, but as conquerors of silence? To the elder races, it was something worse. A reminder. A ghost of the only enemy who had ever made them feel fear. The humans had not spoken a word. They didn't need to. Somewhere, deep in the forgotten archives of the Terran Empire, records still exist of the human wars, ancient conflicts that predated even the Council's founding. Back then, humanity had risen too quickly, too fiercely. They had refused integration. Refused to surrender their skies, their oceans, their freedom. The Terran Empire had called them barbarians with machines. But the truth was far more dangerous. Humanity didn't fight for territory. They fought for existence. And that kind of war never really ends. So when their world fell, the galaxy thought the story was over. But extinction, it seems, is a word the humans never understood. Admiral Crichthane watched as the Council debated response protocols. He stared at the image again, the human fleet drifting like a storm held in orbit. Thousands of ships. Designs the galaxy had never seen. Some looked as though they had been grown from metal rather than built. Others emitted faint gravitational distortions, bending light around them. Every scan returned the same impossible readings, technology centuries ahead of the Empire's best. And yet, no communication. No sound. Only the waiting. To the Council, it felt like judgment. To Crichthane, it felt like dread. He remembered the stories his ancestors told, forbidden tales of what the humans once did when provoked. How they turned entire warfronts into traps of light and vacuum. How they weaponized gravity itself. How, when they realized they could not win conventionally, they changed the rules. Perhaps they want peace, one delegate said. But even he did not believe it. Because every species in that room could feel the message, even if no words were spoken. We are back. And we remember. As the council's session adjourned in panic, Crickthane lingered. He watched the feed replay, the slow rotation of the Terran flagship. He could almost imagine eyes staring through the camera feed, studying him in return. Not with hatred, but with understanding. As if the humans knew what fear looked like, and had chosen to let the galaxy remember it. The Serra Empire had spent millennia building monuments to its supremacy. Now, those monuments felt like gravestones. And in that eerie, growing silence, something shifted in the galaxy's collective consciousness. Civilizations that had forgotten what it meant to be afraid, remembered. Worlds that had never known war began to prepare for it. The Council, the so-called guardians of peace, started to whisper contingency plans. And far away, on the edge of a dying star, the Terran fleet remained motionless, their presence a living echo of a species once thought erased. When the Serra Emperor finally addressed the Council, his words were measured, cold, and rehearsed. The humans are relics, he said. If they truly exist, they will be dealt with. But even as he spoke, the room felt hollow. Because they all knew the Empire's fleets were already in retreat. Entire sectors were cutting transmissions. Outposts near the frontier had gone dark. And above those voids, satellites picked up faint transmissions. Repeating in an old, forgotten language. This time, we do not warn. It was the first message humanity had sent in 500,000 years. And for the galaxy, it was enough. Because sometimes, the silence of a species is not death. Sometimes, it's preparation. And on that day, as the Galactic Council stared into the cold light of a fleet that should not exist, every civilization understood a truth that shook them to their core. Humanity had returned. And the galaxy would never sleep again. The galaxy expected fire. They expected the Terran fleet to strike, to burn, to unleash vengeance like a storm from the abyss. But nothing came. Days passed. Then weeks. And still, the fleet did not move. They drifted across the dark between stars like patient ghosts, their formation unchanged. No weapons fired. No communications. Only that single coded pulse, a heartbeat, rhythmic and deliberate. Every species tried to decipher it. Every empire sent their best cryptographers, their brightest minds, their most advanced AI. None succeeded. Because the message wasn't meant for the galaxy. It was meant for the humans themselves. When the Harari, a neutral species known for their ancient foresight, were asked to interpret the Terran silence, they gave a simple answer. They are not waiting. They are remembering. The Council dismissed it at first. But then, strange things began to happen. Ships from the frontier stopped responding. Trade convoys vanished along the old human routes. Entire star systems, once loyal to the Serra Empire, cut ties without warning. Not out of rebellion, but out of fear. They said they'd seen something. A shadow passing through the dark. A human voice whispering through their comms before the signal died. The Serra Empire called it terrorism. But deep down, they knew better. This wasn't war. This was theater. And humanity was reminding the galaxy of what fear used to feel like. On the third month of the Terran silence, the first human broadcast finally came through. It was not a declaration. Not even a transmission of intent. It was a memory. A fragment of sound, distorted and ancient. A human voice, raw, trembling, defiant. We are not gone. We are the consequence. The council chambers fell silent again. For many of the younger races, the words meant little. But for the elders, those who had seen the first wars, it was enough. They remembered the last time humanity had spoken like that. And what came after? What the galaxy never understood was that humans didn't think in centuries or dynasties. They thought in survival. Every loss became a lesson. Every extinction became a seed. While the Empire basked in its own power, humanity had been rebuilding, not in open space, but in the forgotten layers of the galaxy. In dead worlds stripped of resources. In asteroids the Empire deemed useless. In the cold shadows of nebulae where sensors failed. Humanity learned to hide, not out of weakness, but strategy. They studied every empire's structure, every flaw, every overconfidence. They didn't need to outnumber the galaxy. They only needed to outthink it. And so, when they finally returned, they didn't announce war. They announced inevitability. Admiral Crichthane, now stripped of command, sat alone in a darkened observation room aboard the Imperial Spire. He watched the Terran fleet on the central holophede, still motionless, still silent. He'd spent his life believing in the Empire's doctrine. That peace was control, that power was truth, that fear maintained order. But what he saw now shattered all of it. Because the humans had achieved the impossible, they'd made the galaxy fear without lifting a weapon. They had turned absence into dominance. Crichthane whispered to himself. They don't need to fight us, because they already have. He didn't mean physically. He meant psychologically. Every fleet movement now revolved around the humans. Every council session began with their name. Every empire adjusted its defenses, its propaganda, its economy, because of ghosts who said nothing. That was humanity's genius. They didn't need to win battles. They needed the galaxy to destroy itself in anticipation. Meanwhile, somewhere deep in Sol, the system long thought to be lifeless, a signal flickered to life. Not a transmission, but a synchronizing pulse. A call and response across the dark. And suddenly, hundreds of Terran ships began to shift formation. It wasn't random. It was beautiful. Like a dance written in geometry and mathematics, aligning toward a single invisible point, the galactic core. The Council panicked. The Empire scrambled fleets. Dozens of navies mobilized. But the humans still didn't fire. Instead, their signal changed again. A new message, quiet but deliberate. Observation complete. Then, as one, the entire Terran fleet disappeared, vanishing into folds of spacetime no empire could trace. Every attempt to follow ended in sensor failure, quantum static, or madness. To the galaxy, they had come and gone like a hallucination. But for those who truly understood, it was far worse. It meant humanity wasn't attacking. They were studying. They were learning. And when they returned again, it wouldn't be a warning. Weeks later, in a remote observation post near the edge of Sarah space, a single ensign made a discovery. The stars had changed. Not visibly, but mathematically. Constellations that should have remained constant showed faint shifts. Patterns of gravity that didn't align with known physics. And in that data, hidden within the drift, was a message. Encoded not in light, not in sound, but in the movement of the galaxy itself. We remember what you did to us. The signal spread like wildfire. Entire star systems went dark rather than risk being next. The Empire began to crumble under the weight of its own paranoia. Worlds that once pledged allegiance now whispered of surrender, not to a fleet, but to an idea. Humanity had become myth again. But this time, it wasn't legend or warning. It was inevitability. The Harari, when asked to predict what came next, gave the same answer they had given centuries ago. The humans will not conquer the galaxy. They will teach it. And perhaps that was the most terrifying truth of all. Because the galaxy had built itself on arrogance, on certainty that it was beyond consequence. And now, an ancient species, born from a small blue world, had returned to remind them that consciousness itself carries memory. The memory of struggle. Of pain. Of survival. And the moment humanity remembered who they were. The galaxy remembered what they had forgotten. That no empire lasts forever. When the Terran Empire finally fell, it didn't happen in fire. It happened in fear. No fleet arrived. No bombardment. Just silence. A silence that stretched across systems, where communication relays went dark one by one. A silence that made admirals resign, colonies rebel, and planets question why they had ever obeyed. The empire that had once erased humanity was now being erased, not by war, but by memory. Because humanity had returned not as conquerors, but as a reflection. A mirror held up to the galaxy, showing what happens when arrogance forgets humility. The Council tried to intervene. They sent envoys to the Terran coordinates, pleas for peace, for negotiation. None returned. Some said the humans received them kindly, listened, even offered water and warmth, before letting them leave with their memories erased. Others whispered that the envoys never left at all, that they were kept as witnesses to something greater than diplomacy. But in truth, no one really knew what humanity wanted. Because every time the galaxy looked for them, humanity was somewhere else, always watching, never striking. Until one day, the Terran fleet reappeared. Not on the Empire's borders. Not near the Council's core. But above a star that no one dared approach, the ancient system once called Sol. Crumbled was there, one of the few remaining officers who hadn't defected or vanished. He stood aboard the ruins of the Imperial flagship Vorath, now little more than a drifting relic. And in that haunting silence, he saw the truth. Earth was alive. The planet that should have been a dead husk now glowed with energy grids visible from orbit. The Terran fleet hung above it like guardians of a world reborn. Cities illuminated the continents. And for the first time in 500,000 years, humanity looked up at their own stars again. Crumbled opened a transmission channel. He didn't expect a response. But a voice came through, calm, human, deliberate. You should not have come here. The tone wasn't hostile. It was weary. The kind of exhaustion that only a species carrying too much history could express. Crumbled swallowed. Is this vengeance? He asked. The voice paused. No. Vengeance is for the living. We are something else now. The channel cut. Moments later, every ship in orbit began transmitting the same encrypted signal, a deep pulse that resonated through spacetime itself. The Empire's remaining sensors recorded gravitational waves bending in. Perfect synchronization. It wasn't an attack. It was a message. We forgive. But we do not forget. And just like that, every Terran world, every loyal fleet, every surviving outpost went silent. But as the galaxy held its breath, waiting for the end, something unexpected happened. The Harari transmitted a warning. Their voice, ancient and tremoring, reached every council frequency simultaneously. You have feared the wrong thing. The council demanded explanation. But the Harari refused to elaborate. They only sent a final message. Humanity was not destroyed. They were hidden. Protected. Because something older than them wanted it so. The message ended, leaving the galaxy colder than before. Because for the first time, the galaxy realized humanity's silence had not been isolation, it had been preservation. The humans hadn't escaped extinction. They had been sheltered from something greater. Centuries before the fall, the Terran Empire had discovered traces of an ancient civilization, one that predated the galaxy's known history. They called them the architects. Beings who shaped stars, sculpted worlds, and then vanished. The Empire dismissed them as myth. But the Harari remembered differently. They believed the architects were not gone, merely waiting. And that humanity, in its strange defiance, had touched something the others never could, a fragment of the architect's design. When humanity vanished, the Harari didn't mourn. They feared. Because they knew the architects never erased anything permanently. They only rebuilt. Now, with the Terran fleets reawakened and the Empire in ruins, the Harari began to see the patterns again, gravitational anomalies forming across the galactic rim. Stars aligning where none should. Space itself bending in subtle, deliberate shapes. They sent warnings. No one listened. And in the quiet dark, humanity watched too, not with triumph, but with understanding. Because they had seen the same signs before. Long ago, before their fall. Before their silence. They remembered what had come just before extinction. And it wasn't the Sarah Empire. On Earth, deep beneath the restored continents, vast machines stirred. Buried in oceans and mountains, ancient structures hummed in harmony, relics humanity hadn't built, but had inherited. Their purpose was unknown. But the Harari knew their name. Architect nodes. Each one pulsed in sync with the galaxy's growing distortion, as if answering a call. Humanity's return wasn't conquest. It was preparation. They hadn't revealed themselves to rule the galaxy. They had come back to stand against what was coming. Crickthane's final entry, recovered decades later from a derelict station near Seoul, contained only one recording. They were never our enemies. We were children playing with the ruins of gods. His transmission ended there, cut by a pulse of light that consumed the station without trace. In the centuries that followed, the galaxy changed again. The Sarah Empire became myth. The Harari vanished into isolation. And the humans, silent once more, withdrew from the stars. But across the void, something else awakened. Structures older than galaxies began to shift, rising from the dark between stars. And for the first time in recorded history, even humanity hesitated. Because as the Harari once said, the architects do not build twice. And if they were building again, then the galaxy itself was being rewritten. That was how the age of empires ended. Not with war. Not with fire. But with understanding, that the universe was older, deeper, and more alive than anyone had imagined. Humanity had returned to remind the galaxy of fear. But in doing so, they had reminded themselves of what fear truly meant. Not extinction. Not domination. But irrelevance, in the face of creation itself.